You can't talk about selling without talking about closing and securing commitments. So that's one of the higher risk areas in the typical sales process. So if you look at this typical sales process, first you identify the opportunity, qualify, understand their needs, propose solutions, all this kind of stuff, and closing somehow comes at the end, which is actually not really true. Very few one-call closes where one conversation leads to a sale. Maybe in a highly transactional environment, maybe so. But usually in a value-based sale, the larger sale is accumulation of smaller successes. So it really is engage the customer in conversation, secure commitment to take the next step. Engage the customer, secure commitment. Engage the customer, secure commitment. Now some sales processes can last months, weeks, months. Long sales cycles can even last over a year. And some sales processes last 2 or 3 conversations. So whatever's appropriate, we need to be thinking about how we can secure, engage the customer, and then secure commitments. When we get to the actual closing techniques, there's more than one way to skin a cat. So one way is just to be direct. Just come right out and say, Mr. Customer, how would you like to proceed from here? And that's not wrong, but one of the risks of that is if the customer doesn't know how best to proceed, they could start making up agenda items that otherwise are unnecessary. In other words, well, can you get me a list of 35 testimonials and 42 proof statements, and can we do some benchmark testing, and can we bring it in and do an implementation trial run, and all of a sudden the sales process gets longer and longer and longer because the salesperson keeps saying, what else do you want me to do? What other hoops do you want me to jump through? So I don't have a problem being direct, but maybe we can insert the idea of testing the waters. Trial closing, if you will, to give you a sense of where you actually are in the sales process so we know how direct we can be. I just believe and I teach that if we insert a certain softness into our commitment requests, it's easier to be actually more direct. It sounds opposite, but by being more respectful and softer, we can be more direct. So there's different ways to do that. One is to ask about smaller components of the larger sale. So for example, you might say, Mr. Customer, are you planning to lease? If you move forward with this, are you planning to lease or purchase? You might ask, do you want us to ship this overnight, or is this regular shipping going to be okay? You might ask, do we need to pay attention to warehousing the equipment once it arrives before it gets put into production? And if the answer is, oh yeah, we've already cleared a space for in the warehouse for the materials, that gives you a pretty good idea that they're down the path. If they say, oh yeah, no, we don't need to ship it overnight because our lead time is 2 weeks from now and we're going to plan to, that gives you a pretty idea that you're pretty close. And once you know you're pretty close, there's a lot less risk. It's not like putting your neck in the block and hoping it doesn't get chopped off. Alternate choice is another trial close. Mr. Customer, if you choose to go forward with this, have you decided whether or not you want red, green, or blue? And if they say, well, we're definitely going to go with green, that gives you an indication of where they stand in terms of making a decision. I like the one to ask beyond the transaction because it tends to, if self-serving isn't good, being customer-focused is better. This puts you out of the self-serving camp into the customer-focused camp. And here are the words. Mr. Customer, okay, let's think beyond the transaction. If you choose to move forward with this, I mean, down the road, if and when you choose to move forward with this, when would you want it to be implemented fully operational? And the customer might come back and say January 1st. Okay, so if you move forward with this, January 1st, you want to start off the new year with this as part of the operation, yes? And they go, yeah. Okay, well, if we work backwards from that, would you want to test it, have a testing period before you put it into production? They'd say, well, yeah, we'd want to test it. Well, how long would you want to test it for? A couple weeks? Yeah, 2 or 3 weeks. All right, well, wait a minute. The second half of December usually is holiday time, so 2 or 3 weeks, we need to be thinking end of November to place an order. And by the way, the decision process, the purchasing process, how long does that take? And they say, well, that usually takes 2 or 3 weeks as well. Okay, wait a minute. Now we're back to the beginning of November. And if you're going to do an evaluation process, how long does that take? And they said, well, it's probably about 30 days before we do the evaluation and get the committee together. Okay, well, now we're back to the beginning of October. Let me check my watch. It's mid-September. If you want this fully operational January 1st, we pretty much have to start the ball rolling in the next week or two. And what happens is January 1st is next year. It's next year. It's way far away until you back up and find out January 1st operational is actually 2 weeks away. And so, wow, thanks for bringing that to my attention. Now we can get the ball rolling and not have a fire drill. We need this yesterday at the end of the year. Another technique, pure communication technique that I really like is called a humbling disclaimer. There are some questions that are sensitive, and sensitive, by sensitive I mean high risk. So, for example, asking about the budget. Mr. Customer, do you have budget for this? Just has that feel of I'm about to reach in your pocket, grab your wallet, and yank it as hard as I can. If you use a humbling disclaimer, what that is a prefix to your question. It sounds like this. Mr. Customer, I don't want to be pushy or step out of bounds and ask something I'm not supposed to ask about, but do you mind if I ask the budget question? Now, technically, the answer to that is yes, I mind, or no, I don't. 9 times out of 10, they share their budget, or they share something about their budget. They may not share exact numbers, but they might say, oh yeah, as a matter of fact, we're in the process of getting it approved, or we won't be able to get approved till February, or whatever. But knowing where you stand is the key to securing commitment, because if you don't know where you stand, you're just guessing. It's high risk. And by the way, if you keep coming back to the well and being shut down and shut down and shut down, in a very short period of time, you become a pest. Another idea is you might even try being honest. Mr. Customer, I've been working with my team and we've been forecasting this deal to close by the end of March. From an implementation perspective, to have the resources ready, I would rather be accurate than optimistic. So when my boss asked me later today, is March still a reasonable target? Can I ask, what should I tell him? Is that still reasonable, or is this going to be pushed out? I literally would ask that. Critics of that might say, well, Tom, you're giving the customer an out. I would argue back, they already have an out. They already know they don't have to buy from you. I just want to know where I stand. So if they go, no, you can tell your boss, we'll be ready by the end of March. Then I know exactly where I stand. I'm in a good position. If they come back and say, oh, yeah, this is probably going to get pushed out. Whoa. To when? What's happening? What do we need to think about? And all of a sudden, the reality is it may be pushed out and you may be able to rescue that. But you can only rescue it if you know what the true status of it is. And the last technique I'll just mention as a trial closing technique is ask the customer for their advice. Mr. Customer, if you were in my shoes, if you were the salesperson in this account, what would you be doing differently? Or would you be doing anything differently? And they may come back and give you some constructive feedback, which is probably some of the best feedback you'll ever get. They might say, well, if I was on the account, I would ask for the order 2 weeks ago. They might say, if I was on the account, I would push for a meeting with the executive team. If I was in the account, I might just be a little bit patient because the internal workings have to work, and 2 weeks from now we'll be in good shape. And that's great advice. All of that information gives me an advantage over just hoping to ask for commitments and putting my head on the block and incurring risk. I used to have a sales manager who said, you have to get used to being rejected. In fact, the more times you get rejected, the closer you are to making a sale. To me, that always sounded silly. To me, I'd rather be rejected less. But that entails winning more often. And winning more often is a function of good technique and good strategy and being perceived as customer focused, which has a lot to do with you.